So again, my name is Riyanat. I'm a software engineer, and my topics of, on tracing microservices HTTP requests using Jaeger. And Jaeger is a tracing tool. So I'm going to start the talk with what Jaeger is and why you might find it beneficial. Just like a I'll do that very briefly. I appreciate some of you might actually be familiar with it because it's been around for a while. But then the bulk of the talk is really going to be about how you can instrument Jaeger if you want to experiment with it. And particularly when you've got like a Spring Boot microservice, because it's pretty straightforward to actually do once you know what you're doing. So what exactly is Jaeger? It is a tracing platform. So it's got multiple components, but the real candy is that it provides you with analytical capabilities as well as visualizations that can help you trace your request through your microservices. So it was developed by Uber, and this screenshot is a screenshot of some of Uber's microservices. So each of the somewhat green circles is a microservice. And what you can see here with the red lines is, for example, your request as it flows through microservices. So I'll give a typical example. Let's say you have user service, and giving a user's ID, you can get user information. Now, if you have a microservice architecture, you might have multiple microservices involved, like user invoice service, user product service, user address service, user detail service, and the list goes on. And in order to fulfill just that one request, you might need to hit multiple microservices. So when it comes to stuff like debugging and just really understanding what's going on in this like massive distributed network of services, Jaeger is a cool tool for understanding what's going on. So I work on a team that builds and manages recommendations engines, and we use microservices again quite a lot. And one of the applications that we've built on the team that I work on is a similarities API. So let's say you have a given product, you will send a request, and it basically returns other similar products to the initial product that you specified. And the architecture of this is based, again, on multiple services that are involved. It could be up to 8 microservices that might be involved in a single HTTP request, as well as storage, as well as a few other components. So I started looking into improving our debugging process, because I noticed a couple of things, that when it came to certain product IDs, the request might be a bit longer. So it's like, what is really going on in this request? And I wanted to like be able to see more than a Grafana dashboard, or more than just looking at my Kibana logs or something like that. I wanted to see the details of my request, like what's going on, which service is causing this request to take the longest. And so here's why I like the Jaeger visualizations are pretty cool, because here's an example of a Jaeger visualization. So we send a get request, get me the similar products. And what you have at the top is a summary. You can see the duration is like a little bit over 3 seconds. You can see that 4 services were involved, and there's some more summary information. And the cool part is this Gantt chart waterfall-like diagram, which together is called a trace in Jaeger speak. And the individual subtasks are like spans. So what we can see here is, like in the previous slide, I showed you that there are multiple services. Service A calls service B, and then subsequently you've got service B that invokes some other services. So that's like a simpler trace. And this one's a little bit more detailed. And what you have here is more services, like 2 extra services. Duration's a little bit longer. But what I like about this is that you can immediately see where I've got circled. You've got that long lilac rectangle that takes a little bit over 2 seconds. And that's like more than, well, let's just say it's about half of the request time. And these are the kind of things that I wanted to see, because I wanted to say, well, which service is causing this HTTP request to take this long? And I really wanted to drill down into the nitty-gritty of my request. So those are some benefits to using Jaeger as a tracing tool to really understand what's going on. The more microservices you have, the more you might find it useful. If you just, if you're working on a monolith, you might not find it as useful, because it's like send a single request and it only hits like 1 API and that's it. But if you've got a distributed network of microservices and you really want to understand what's going on, then Jaeger could be a cool tool for you to use. And so onto the bulk part of the presentation, which is how do I get set up really quickly? How do I experiment really quickly? So the main components are the client, which is your application, and then the server side. And in the client, what's really happening is you've got your application running that forwards on these traces and spans, as I mentioned earlier on, forwards them to the agent on the client, and that then goes off to the server. So what we'll do is just treat the Jaeger server like a black box for now and just focus on like, what do I need to do to get my client up and running? And so if you are familiar with Spring and you're using Spring, it's pretty straightforward to get set up. So there is a library dependency, which includes Jaeger. Jaeger is an implementation of the open tracing. Well, the Jaeger client itself is an implementation of the open tracing API. So you've got all this bundled into just like one dependency, one Spring dependency. And so then the next thing is to create a sequence of Spring beans. So again, if you're familiar with Spring App, this is like pretty straightforward to do. You have a configuration file and you specify beans that need to be created when the Spring App starts up. The tracer bean is the core part because you want to specify what the which Jaeger service to send the request to, and the sampling strategy. So it's like, do you want to sample all HTTP requests or what exactly is the sampling deal? And then the reporter is where you specify the actual Jaeger server, the URL of the Jaeger server. So I've missed out some code just for simplicity here, but in theory, all you're really creating is that initial tracer config.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I see you're using in the, I think 2 slides back, I see you're using Gradle. Is there a Maven equivalent?
Yes, there is. There is a Maven equivalent. I had that on, it's funny you've actually asked that because I had that on the screen and I thought, I'll just take it out.
Okay,
yes,
cool.
there is.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks. Carry on, please.
Nice. And so once you've got the library, once you've got your tracer up and being initialized, what you then want to do in your code is start tracing, basically. So imagine you have a controller class, which is where all your business logic is, and you want to start a span, and then you'd have your business logic and then finish a span. But this is a manual approach of doing this. And we kind of don't want to do this, mainly because you then have this non-functional code, which is not business logic, like intertwined with your business logic. It doesn't like look quite neat. The library provides a better way to do this. So again, with most applications, you can have filters, and in Spring, you can have a filter. For example, you might have an authentication filter. It's like before you get to your business logic code, this code gets executed. And the library includes a tracing filter. In the tracing filter is where the spans are started and where the spans are finished. So again, it's like nicely decoupling your business logic from the Jaeger tracing. So again, what we're creating here is another bean. You're specifying a tracer, you're creating the tracing filter, and you're just registering that, again, using Spring. It's a few lines of code and you're up and running. And I don't think I left any code out here. It's pretty much all you need to get the tracing filter sorted. And so then the final bean that you need to create is what happens, for example, when you've got like service A that needs to talk to service B. With the way Jaeger works, you want all of your spans to come under a single transaction. So if you also have Jaeger on your next service, like service B, you don't want service B to then decide to just go and create a whole new trace. You kind of want all the tracing information to come under the same one that the top root service initializes. And what's happening in the way it works in the background is that the tracing information is injected into the HTTP request and extracted on the other end. And again, what we don't want to do is do this manually by manually injecting tracing information where you've got your business logic running. Instead, we want to use like tracing inceptors. And if you're familiar with using Spring again and REST templates, it's pretty straightforward. Just add an interceptor and there is already a tracing interceptor that comes with the library. So, whoops, go back to that slide. So believe it or not, those are pretty much the main beans, the main Spring beans that you need to create. And that's pretty much all you need to do to get your client up and running. So now let's look at the server component. The Jaeger server has got multiple components. So like I was saying, on the client forwards it to the agent forwards this onto the Jaeger server, and you've got the collector, and then storage, which is persisted. And then you've got the UI, which is again, is the candy of the whole Jaeger service. The query component that allows you to query the traces that have been collected. And although I didn't look into it, the documentation shows that there's a data mining component that uses Spark. I didn't look into it. So yeah. If you're experimenting locally, you can get a Jaeger server, like all in one, all the different components in a single Docker container. So again, on a one-liner, a single Docker command, you can have a Jaeger server running locally. The downside is that the storage is all in memory, but you can experiment very quickly with it. So let's just say server's up and running. And then the UI is accessible on port 16686. So I'll just show an example of tracing a HTTP request. So I've got a Jaeger server set up that isn't local, but I've got some local services that are pushing their traces to the remote server. The API that I mentioned earlier on very briefly, which is the API that looks for similar products, is the same one that I'm going to invoke. And because we're not interested in the actual response that's returned, but we're interested in the headers, I'm just going to not show the response and just send a head request. What we also do on the team that I work on is for each HTTP request that you send out, we assign a unique ID to the request. And you can get that from the HTTP response headers. And that's pretty cool for, it's pretty useful. We find it very useful. So it's the X correlation ID. We find it very useful because each one of the microservices use this ID in their logs. And so you can just see on the UI, what I can do here. And then again, this is my Jaeger server. I added this as a tag, and I can specifically look for that ID and find a trace. And I can see instantly the trace over here that's been collected. And it's quite detailed, but let's just close that very quickly. And what we've got is we can see that the HTTP request itself took about slightly under 2 seconds. There were 5 services involved. Service A calls service B. And again, there's more information. B calls C, and so on and so forth. And you've got all these additional services. So going back to the presentation, was that a question? Sorry?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, if you could expand the screen, the browser, but if you're going to move away, that's fine. It's okay.
It's absolutely fine. Hey, Barry, how am I doing on time?
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
All right, so let me just try and go back to this.
Thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
No worries. So yeah, I'm happy to just talk about the details of this. In the summary panel, well, actually, yeah, that's a good point. You can see the duration services that are involved and the Gantt chart diagram itself, and you can see the details, service B calls C. And all these requests are one after the other, so they're not happening in parallel. And again, it's quite interesting because it really does help you to discover like the workflow of like how the interaction between the microservices. It was when I was doing some experimenting that we actually realized, oh, maybe we could just send those requests in parallel, or have asynchronous calls or something like that. There's nothing really stopping us from doing them in parallel. And there are a few other visualizations. I quite like this. So this is similar to the one that I showed at the beginning, but I only have like 6 microservices, so it's in no way similar to Uber's diagram. But then we can see the dependencies between services. We can see A depends on B depends on C and D, E depends on E and F. And there's also another tab for you to compare traces. So if you've got 2 traces, which I don't unfortunately have their IDs, but this produces a graph that shows you the difference in their workflow. So that's pretty much the demo. I think the main takeaway that I wanted like people to go away with today is that it's quite straightforward. There are a lot of libraries out there to help you, and even if it's not Spring, when it comes to, if you're using, I think was it the Apache HTTP library. It's also easy to set up. You don't have to have a lot of manual boilerplate code. And there's a lot out there. And there are also some alternatives. So I've used Zipkin in the past. And I've heard of Dynatrace. There are a lot of solutions out there. And yeah, the more microservices you have, the more you might find this beneficial. But those are my main takeaways today. So thank you for listening. If you do tracing and you do it differently, I'll be interested in hearing as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Riyanat. Appreciate that. Are you happy to take any questions on that? If there are any other questions, or are you?
No, I'm happy to take questions. Yeah, sure. If you've got questions.
Did anyone have any questions out there?
Yeah, I have one. I just want to see the client configuration again, if it's possible.
Yeah, of course. So let me. So if we go back to the client configuration, I think that was roughly around here. So I guess the takeaway of this section is 3 main beans: the tracer, and the tracer here, you specify the sampling strategy. Sampling strategy is, for example, do you want to trace everything or do you not want to trace everything? The reporter itself, in there, you create a reporter config that specifies the actual Jaeger service URL. So tracer bean, we don't want to do this because that's a manual approach. We want to create a tracing filter. This is the configuration. And then the final one is you want to create an interceptor.
Right. So this controller and interceptor is per HTTP request, or is it broad for the service?
No, so this is broad for the service. Okay. If you use, but then again, it depends on how you've got Spring set up. So if in each class you create a REST template, then you might need to add the interceptor. So the way like a lot of our applications are set up is at the beginning, we just have one REST template instance. Right. And that REST template instance is passed through any other class that might need it. And okay. So when we do that way, then we only have to add the interceptor once.
Okay, so the controller and the interceptor is unique.
Yes.
Across the service.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right, Riyanat, I think we had a few questions on the chat from Matt as well. Didn't know if you wanted to look at this. So this was, does this cover sync and async scenarios? And does this cover only layer 7, or can layer 4 TCP be covered too?
Does this cover, does it cover asynchronous and non-asynchronous calls? Is that the question? I have to check the chat. How do I check?
Matt, I don't know if you want to come off mute if you had anything to add there at all.
If they are, I mean, when you're tracing, if you're sending asynchronous calls or you're using, yeah, so if you're sending asynchronous calls, at some point, the user is waiting for like the response. So if it's, if it's synchronous, it's easier done. I actually don't know about asynchronous, to be fair. Does this cover only layer 7 or can layer 4? I have no idea about the second question.
Okay, looking at, there's a few other questions coming in, Ree. It might be better to say, we'll take those to the chat afterwards. So maybe you can speak to people directly on the chat.
Yes.
Is that okay? I hope that's okay with everyone. Just conscious that, that obviously Sam's coming up as well. So yeah, feel free to speak to people directly, but thank you so much for that. Very much appreciated. Cool. So next we have Sam Burden. Sam, you're sharing a screen, aren't you?
Right, yeah, that's good. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I wasn't sure if my mic's working. Is it?
Mic's working now.
That's great. I'll just share my screen now. Oops, where is it? Okay, can you guys see it okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so hi everyone, my name's Sam. I'm here today to talk to you about my experience of being a mentee during a career change. So I thought I'd basically start off introducing my current situation, I suppose how I found a mentor, and I suppose what I've learned so far being a mentee during this process. So my background and situation. So I'm currently a marketing executive within the airline industry. So I've been in marketing for about 4 years. In April this year, I was made furloughed. So it made me question in terms of understanding where I want to go with my career and understanding what I want to do next in terms of a career role. And so it took me a couple months to understand what I actually genuinely wanted from a career. So I wanted more entrepreneurialism, I wanted more creative thinking, and I wanted to, I suppose, bring more of a difference to my career than my current job role within marketing. So I did a lot of research to understanding where my current job role fits within the next step. Would I go for a role that's similar to what I'm doing now or something completely different? And this led me to go for a career change into user experience and design, so UX for short. There was just one problem I had, as the fact that I had no contacts or any experience within this field or industry. So for me, it was kind of seeking into an unknown. As much as I, for a couple months, took on courses, went to meetups, just done general Google searches on the topic, I wasn't really sure how to transition from marketing to UX, looking at building blocks, understanding how my current job role fits into the role of UX. So yeah, it was fitting into an unknown. So again, taking another couple of weeks, going, speaking to people, looking at Google searches again, it led me to understand that I needed to seek guidance and support for my career role and career change. And the common thing that came up was find a mentor, which is great because you have contacts within, they'll have contacts in that field, they're able to advise you in terms of job role and understand, okay, these are next steps you need to go. There was one problem with that fact, is the fact that I'm an introvert, and for me to, in previous job roles and in my personal life, it's hard for me to approach somebody asking for help. So my steps for this were to actually, okay, again, taking on my introversion and actually do a lot of research in terms of how I can approach this. And the key thing for me was to actually highlight the reasons why I needed a mentor, because I knew I wanted to go into UX. I knew that it's the career I wanted to go into. I knew there was courses in there. I know there's guidance, and I know there's websites dedicated on the actual field itself. But actually, for myself to develop a career in that from marketing, it was quite difficult. So for me, I had to set a criteria in terms of who I was looking for. Stepping into unknown, I need to find out the reasons why I was looking for somebody. So for me, it was trying to find somebody who's been on a similar path myself. So transition from one career change to another, preferably within, I suppose, an uncertain market or time. Looking at somebody who has experience of being a mentor before in terms of guiding me through the process from transitioning from, say, marketing to UX. And I think for me also understand them on a personal level. I think that's one thing that when I was doing this research and understanding, finding a mentor, I needed to find out how I can connect with somebody. And so that took me on the road of, okay, then I need to look at online researching communities in terms of understanding who I can connect with and look at who matches my criteria the most. So it took me, okay, I sort of researched 10 people, I would say, who met that criteria. And looking back on my mistake on that, I should have actually had a specific reason to connect with people, because they met the criteria, because I thought they met the criteria I was looking for, but there was no personal connection. So I would send out an email that was quite generic, either via LinkedIn or email, and say, I'm looking for help within UX from transitioning from marketing. Can you help? And realizing that a lot of them got back to me in terms of giving me great advice, seeking out additional resources, courses, and also helping out, I suppose, with how I present myself to employers. So portfolios, LinkedIn profile, CV and covering letter. But it was only one way. And
oh, I think we might have lost Sam there. Is everyone else still there?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, we're still here.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Sam. Oh, yep, you're back. You're back.
Okay.
Sorry, man.
That's all right. So for me, I kind of, oh, can you hear me okay? Is that all right? Yeah, it's good. Okay. So for me, I was trying to, I suppose, trying to highlight somebody who I could personally get on well with. And that led me to a person called Laura. So she, I suppose, ticked all the boxes in terms of, okay, then I needed to, she was previously a web developer and went into UX. So she had that experience of transitioning from careers. She also had that experience of being a mentor. So it would still be, I'll get guidance from her in terms of how to develop within UX. And the important thing is we built actually related to each other on a personal level. The reason being is she actually comes from my hometown in Bournemouth, in fact, not too far away. So we're able to connect in terms of understanding, local area and just have a general chat. So for me, that made me more comfortable actually connecting with somebody within that sort of mentee-mentor relationship. So far, the relationships, I suppose, it's been about 5 months. It's been a slow process, but for me, it's been great because it's been baby steps within the mentee process. And I suppose during furlough, I've had that time to develop that mentee-mentor relationship, to actually grow within taking on what I've learned so far within marketing to user research and design. So far, it's been great. I've been taking on projects that Laura suggested, been more of a guidance and I suppose directions in terms of how I can approach UX, either doing personal projects to actually understand theory into practice, also seeking out networks and building up, I suppose, my own mini community within that field, so I can actually feel like although I'm not currently within UX itself in terms of job role, I'm taking on new responsibilities, I'm taking on more guidance in terms of job role activities. And so far, I feel like I'm on my way to where I want to be within my career. And I kind of wanted to highlight, I suppose, learning experiences that I've learned so far during the process, because for me, it's been great, but I needed to understand, okay, then if I was in that position myself again, me has been feel comfortable seeking advice and feedback. Now, from, I suppose, past me, it's kind of always been seeking advice that's been one way. Within an organization, it's always been, okay, seek advice for one, I suppose, specific activity or within the job role. But then also it's being comfortable accepting feedback. And again, feedback for me in the past has always been either quite harsh or it's not been, I haven't really taken it on board. But I suppose with that mentee-mentor relationship, I've had to learn to be comfortable accepting feedback. And although it makes me vulnerable and I think, oh my God, I've made mistakes, I feel less, I feel more like I'm growing in terms of a person and actually learning more. So I think the second thing for me has been taking on responsibility for my own learning and actions towards my career goals. Again, during my career life at the moment, and I suppose in the past actually, it's been focused on my work guiding me for learning. So whether it's a new activity within or new role within the organization that I need to learn a bit more about or seeking guidance, it's only been a one-way system, where for me actually it's been, so my mentor has been great in terms of saying, okay, then you can do this in your spare time, either do research within a specific topic like learning about how design systems or something more specific, but I've needed to take on my own responsibility for learning and actions towards that goal. So then I can get feedback and then actually improve a bit more. And I think that's, again, something that's made me feel uncomfortable at the start, but actually as time goes on, I've been more comfortable doing my own learning and actually obtaining that feedback from a mentor. And I think the final thing I've learned, which is quite important, has been the mentee-mentor relationship is two-way development. And I think for me, again, this is all learning experiences that I've learned from my past that have actually helped me to grow a bit more, is the fact that I've always thought it might be just a one-way system in terms of learning, like it's one person learns from another and that's it. But with the mentee-mentor relationship, I've learned that it's been two ways. It's kind of been, I've learned from her experiences of how to develop and grow within UX. I've also learned that it's acceptable for me to take on what I've learned from marketing into UX and not feel like I'm going a backward step. It's more of a side step. But then also I feel like the mentor relationship is growing because she's gaining experience of what I'm going through in terms of learning and development, and also in my marketing field. I feel like I can bring that over to the relationship as well. So that is the main points of my talk today. Basically, to sum up, I suppose, what I've been talking about today, it's been a fantastic opportunity for myself to be a mentee during career change. It's been I suppose a positive influence in terms of how I've grown as a person, looking at, although it's been difficult to find a mentor in the first place, it was, as I found one, it's kind of been helpful in terms of helping me guide me correctly to the career that I want to go to, and actually provide me with actionable key points that I can keep learning and growing. And I think for me, the one thing I want to take out of it is actually feeling more comfortable seeking advice and feedback, towards knowing that actually by stepping out my comfort zone, I'm actually going to be growing more as a person, both in my career life and working life as well. So thank you very much for my talk, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sam. Does anyone have any questions at all for Sam on the talk? Feel free just to unmute if you've got anything you could ask. I've just had one through. So Farhad, so how did Sam find her mentor in the first place?
So I found my mentor through a UX community. Basically, there's a website, I can't remember what it's called now, but they have a list of mentees you can approach. And basically, I emailed them or messaged them via LinkedIn to say, I'm just seeking help. But actually, I think if you want more specific reasons to have a mentor, I would suggest the reasons why you want to work with them in particular, rather than just generic, oh, I need a mentor. I think that's my approach that I took in the first place, and it was kind of the wrong approach.
It was the wrong approach. That's interesting. So what was the right approach then? What worked for you then, Sam?
I think for me, it's reading up on the actual mentor themselves. Mm-hmm. So I had this, as I said, I had a set criterion of what I was looking for a mentor, but it was kind of one way. And if I'm looking at the past, I would actually say read particularly their bios and actually find out something that connects me with them. And something more specific, just anything like whether the location, if there's a shared interest, because I realized actually, I know it's a mentee-mentor relationship, but you need that personal connection with somebody.
Okay. And did you find them through the community on LinkedIn, or was it actually some other kind of UX forum?
It was actually on a UX forum I found them on. So they had their details and I just approached them via that. Although, if I'm honest with you, at first it's quite uncomfortable because it's a very unknown. You're approaching somebody you don't know, and that you're receiving an email from somebody like, why are you asking for my help? But I suppose as time goes on, it's made me more comfortable approaching people with that situation.
And are you comfortable sharing how many rejections did you have as mentors before you got your match, or vice versa? Like how many kind of did you have to have them initial chat with them, and then afterwards decide, well, maybe that's not quite right? How did you handle that? The only reason I ask is I'm also quite interested in actually finding a mentor, but Barry's group is amazing because they've got all this Meet a Mentor program, and that makes it easier. But please, that'd be really good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, so I suppose I kind of have to put rejections in sort of different filters. So I approached about, I'd say 15 people. So out of those 15 people, I'd say only 5 actually got back to me in terms of my email. So I was kind of like, they're pretty quick in terms of what I requested from them in terms of information. And then some of them, if I felt like I could get more, I suppose, of a connection with them, I did a Zoom call with them just to see like how I felt with them, if I was comfortable with that sort of relationship. And most of them, I didn't feel that sort of connection. It was great to get advice from them. And even I think some people actually I've met from doing that call, I've met outside of the mentorship and are actually friends with, but not actually mentorship with them, which is quite strange. But yeah, I think you have to kind of go through that. It's like if I'd be honest, it's like blind dating. Like you're trying to meet somebody, but you got to build that connection with them. I think you have to feel like you have to feel comfortable with them. If you don't, it's kind of an awkward sort of getting feedback, and you just don't feel comfortable or confident knowing you're changing.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Sam. And best of luck for your ongoing career change.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Sam. I think it is amazing. Like, we've spent so much time now in mentor introductions and making these things. We started it back in 2012, and we were doing it at universities. And one thing that is just mind-blowing is how many people are happy to help you. How many people will give up their time, their personal time, free time, obviously, to help people they've never met. And it's incredible how, if you all ask exactly what Sam did, right? If all of you now went off and emailed 10, 15 people on LinkedIn that you thought, yeah, I'll speak to them. Obviously not the kind of the top level people, but just kind of people that are further ahead on a journey like yourself, you will all find, I would put money on the fact that you will all find at least one response. I think that exactly what you said there, Sam. It's that point of connection. That point of when you remind someone of themselves 2 years earlier, 1 year earlier, 6 months earlier, 10 years, whatever, it doesn't matter. But that kind of that sense that they see themselves in you. And if you just ask, like, probably 5 or 10% of people will put themselves out there to say, yeah, I'll help people. But I'd say 70, 80% will approach if the right person approaches them, if it's that person that reminds them. So I think it's a great message. And obviously we try and really help people by being that middle ground of asking the people to be mentors, and then trying to encourage people to ask for mentors through the Meet a Mentor community. So yeah, it's just such a powerful message, I think, there. So yeah, well done. By the way, in my introduction, sorry, I only decided I was going to give that about 10 minutes before the presentation. So it is an aspiring women's speaker group that I was referring to, but we also have a larger aspiring speakers group. So if you're interested in speaking, then you don't have to be a woman to get involved. We'll help anyone get involved, but there is just a smaller group, a sort of subgroup. So yeah, thank you very much to our speakers today. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be sharing the video on YouTube at least by the end of this week, hopefully tomorrow. So yeah, thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks, guys.